the Galactic Federation Academy, where bright young minds from across the cosmos come to learn the intricacies of interstellar diplomacy, advanced xenobiology, and snobiology, and snop. I use that term loosely, mind you. For most species, survival meant not forgetting to water themselves or accidentally rolling off a cliff while daydreaming about sentient clouds. But then there was Earth, that unassuming little blue marble that had the audacity to evolve here. I, Xylox, esteemed professor of xenosociology and part-time stand-up comedian through my students might argue that those roles are often reversed, had the dubious honor of overseeing this year's survival training exercise. Picture, if you will, a sea of eager alien faces, some with tentacles, others with mandibles, and a worrying number with what appeared to be detachable heads. And there, smack in the middle, sat Alexandra Kumar, human, Deathworlder, walking disaster in a neat academy uniform. Now, I'm not one to discriminate. Some of my best friends are bipeds, but when it comes to humans, well, let's just say they have a reputation. A reputation that makes hardened space pirates nervously check their life insurance policies. Today, I announced, my voice stalks quivering with what I desperately hoped wasn't premonition. We begin our annual survival exercise. You will be divided into teams, each led by a randomly selected captain. Your objective is simply survive for 3 solar cycles on the training moon of Epsilonix. A chorus of excited chirps, whistles, and what sounded suspiciously like a mating call looking at you, glopna, filled the lecture hall. I pulled up the randomized team assignments on the holoscreen, scanning for potential disasters. That's when I saw it. Team 7, Captain Alexandra Kumar, though sweet nebulas preserve us. I briefly considered accidentally deleting the entire Academy database and retiring to a nice, quiet black hole. But no, I had a duty. A sacred trust. A complete lack of transferable job skills. Ahem, I cleared my throat sacs. Team captains, please stand. 6 perfectly respectable alien students rose. And then there was Alexandra. She unfolded herself from her seat with the casual grace of a predator, a grin spreading across her face that made me wonder if humans had evolved from something even more terrifying than I'd previously imagined. Excellent, I said, my voice only cracking twice. Captains, you have 1 hour to strategize with your teams before departure. Remember, this is a controlled exercise. The moon's ecosystem is delicate. Your goal is subtle adaptation and harmonious coexistence with, Professor? Alexandra's hand shot up. Quick question. Are we allowed to eat anything we catch? The resulting silence was broken only by the sound of several students, exoskeletons instinctively high, I suppose, I managed, if it becomes absolutely necessary for survival. But the provided rations should be more than sufficient for. Cool. Alexandra nodded, already turning to her shell-shocked team. So who wants to learn how to make spears? As the teams filed out, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just unleashed something primal and terrifying upon that poor, unsuspecting moon. But surely, I reasoned, it couldn't be that bad. After all, what's the worst a single human could do in 3 days, which the concept of overkill is introduced to several species? The teams were dropped off at strategic locations around Epsilonix's equatorial zone, a temperate forest teeming with docile herbivores and the occasional mildly territorial omnivore. Nothing that should pose a real challenge to even the most pathetically unprepared student. I settled into the observation pod, a steaming cup of nutrient slurry in one appendage and a datapad in another. Time to watch some nice, boring survival techniques, maybe witness a heartwarming moment of interspecies cooperation as they construct a rudimentary shelter. I spat nutrient slurry across 3 screens as the first explosion rocked my pod. What in the name of all that's gelatinous? I sputtered, frantically zooming in on Team 7's location. There, in a clearing that most definitely had not existed 10 minutes ago, stood Alexandra. She was covered in mud, grinning like a lunatic, and appeared to be teaching her team how to make gunpowder. It's a simple chemical reaction. Her voice crackled through the calms. We just need some bird droppings, sulfur from those hot springs we passed, and, hey, Zorgax, your species produces nitrate-rich waste, right? Buddy, you're about to become our secret weapon. I watched in horror as Zorgax, a normally shy Andromean slime mold, pulsated with what I could only describe as a preed. Now, Alexandra continued, who wants to learn about the wonderful world of siege weaponry? 6 tentacles, 3 pincers, and 1 gelatinous pseudopod shot into the air. I briefly considered cutting the feed and reporting a tragic equipment malfunction. But no, I had a responsibility. To science. To the students. To my own morbid curiosity that was currently locked in vicious battle with my self-preservation instinct. Over the next few hours, I witnessed the following. 1. The construction of a disturbingly robust fortification. Complete with watchtowers and something Alexandra called a murder hole, I made a mental note to update the Academy's psychological screening process. 2. A comprehensive lesson on trapping techniques that left half the local fauna cowering in burrows and the other half swearing allegiance to their new apex predator. 3. The invention of at least 3 new tools using nothing but sticks, rocks, and what I strongly suspected was sheer force of will. 4. A crash course in human martial arts that had Glotner accidentally liquefying himself in excitement he got better. As night fell, Team 7 gathered around a roaring bonfire. The flames cast flickering shadows across faces that had, in the span of mere hours, transformed from wide-eyed academy students to, well, I hesitate to use the term warband, but if the ceremonial face paint fits, tomorrow. Alexandra's voice drifted through the speakers, low and intense. I didn't sleep that night. Partially out of professional duty, mostly out of fear for what morning shone in, the ecosystem cries Dawn broke over Epsilonix, painting the sky in hues of lavender and pale green. Birds trilled their morning songs. Small furry creatures emerged from their burrows. Chara algae. I jolted awake, not realizing I'd dozed off. The scene before me was chaotic, felt like too mild a word. Alexandra, now sporting some kind of improvised armor made from tree bark and what appeared to be tanned animal hide. When did she have time to ton hide? Led her team in a full-scale assault on everything. "Remember the plan," she shouted, wielding a spear in one hand and what looked disturbingly like a Molotov cocktail in the other. Zorgax, you take the left flank. Creepex, your sonic scream is our secret weapon. Aim for anything with ears. Glotnar, for the love of all that's holy, stay solid this time. I watched, slack-jawed, as Team 7 proceeded to domesticate, categorize, or thoroughly terrify every living creature in a 5-kilometer radius. Alexandra seemed to be everywhere at once. One moment she was teaching Zorgax the finer points of animal husbandry as they herded a group of 6-legged grazers into a makeshift pen. The next, she was scaling a cliff face with her bare hands, screaming something about establishing air superiority as she raided the nest of some very confused flying reptiles. "Professor." Creep's excited voice crackled through the comm. "Did you see?" I made a friend. I zoomed in to see the Vexillian waving all 4 of his arms enthusiastically. Beside him, looking equal parts terrified and resigned, stood a creature easily 5 times his size. It resembled nothing so much as a furry tank with tusks. That's a Gronkin beast," I stammered. "They're a protected species, highly aggressive. How did Alexandra showed me this thing called belly rubs," Creepy chirped. "Apparently, it works on most mammals. Who knows?" I made another mental note to update all of our xenobiology textbooks. As the day wore on, it became increasingly clear that Team 7 wasn't just surviving. They were thriving. Their camp had evolved into a small village, complete with a smokehouse, tannery, and what Alexandra insisted on calling a pub. I decided not to ask about the suspicious fermentation operation bubbling away behind it. Other teams began to take notice. At first, it was just curious glances and the occasional awestruck whisper. But by mid-afternoon, A steady stream of students from other groups had begun to trickle in. Excuse me. A timid voice caught my attention. It was Liar, the appointed leader of Team 3. All 7 of his eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. We were wondering if we could maybe join. I watched as Alexandra's face lit up with a grin that could only be described as a downright predator. Of course, she exclaimed, throwing an arm around Liare's gelatinous shoulders. The more the merrier. Now, how do you feel about learning to make arrows? By sunset, what had started as 7 disparate teams had somehow morphed into a single, alarmingly cohesive unit. And at the center of it all, holding court like some mud-streaked, slightly singed queen, was Alexandra. I should have put a stop to it. I should have called for an emergency extraction. I should have done literally anything other than sit there, slack-jawed, watching as a bunch of alien children were transformed into a disturbingly effective survival machine. But I didn't, because some tiny, traitorous part of my mind whispered, I wonder what they'll do tomorrow. As I signed off for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed the birth of something significant. Whether that was a good thing or the start of an interstellar incident remained to be seen. I was going to need a lot more nutrient slurry to get through this, in which survival becomes a loose turn. I awoke to the sound of singing. Teary-eyed, I fumbled with the controls, bringing the main view screen to life. There, in the pre-dawn light, stood the entire group. Of the students, not just Team 7, arranged in neat rows. They were NPs. Were they doing calisthenics? Come on, you beautiful senior disaster children. Alexandra's voice rang out, clearer and more energetic than anyone had a right to be at this ungodly hour. Let's get that ectoplasm pumping. Glupnar, I see you trying to ooze out of those jumping jacks. I watched, torn between horror and reluctant admiration, as 35 alien students of wildly varying physiologies attempted to follow Alexandra through a series of exercises that seemed designed by someone with a shaky grasp on skeletal structures and a complete disregard for the laws of physics. And now, Alexandra announced, barely out of breath, for our morning battle cry. Remember, from the diaphragm, or nearest equivalent organ. 1, 2. The resulting sound nearly shorted out my audio receptors. It was a cacophony of roars, shrieks, warbles, and one particularly disturbing subsonic rumble that I'm pretty sure liquefied a nearby boulder. As the echoes faded, I couldn't help but notice the change in the students. Gone were the nervous, out-of-their-depth academics of 2 days ago. In their place stood, well, I hesitate to use the term warband again, but if the ceremonial face paint fit right. Alexandra clapped her hands, grinning like a maniac. Breakfast. Then we start on today's big project. Who's excited to learn about irrigated agriculture and rudimentary metallurgy? The answering cheer would have sent most sensible predators running for the hills. Unfortunately, Epsilon seemed to be fresh out of sensible predators. The local wildlife had either pledged fealty to their new bipedal overlords or was doing its very best impression of an endangered species. I spent the morning in a daze, watching as this ragtag group of students, who, I remind you, were supposedly here to learn basic survival skills, proceeded to speedrun the entire technological development of a civilization. By midday, they had a working forge, just a little something I picked up in my metalworking elective. Alexandra said with a wink that chilled me to my core. Zlorgax, it turned out, had a knack for smelting. His gelatinous form allowed him to handle molten metal with ease, much to everyone's delight, and my continued existential dread. Riar and his team, not to be outdone, had somehow managed to domesticate a herd of those 6-legged grazers. They were now producing milk, wool, and what Alexandra excitedly referred to as wool mounts. I made a mental note to update the strictly herbivorous designation in our xenobiology database, but it was Creepy-X who truly terrified me. The quiet Vexillian had taken Alexandra's offhand comment about air superiority and run with it, or rather, flown with it. He was now leading an entire aerial division, mounted on those flying reptiles whose nests they'd raided on day one. The beasts, it seemed, had imprinted on creepy eggs like some kind of scaly, fire-breathing ducklings. "Isn't it wonderful?" Glöpner's voice oozed through the calm, startling me out of my stupor. "We've learned so much," Alexandra says at this rate. "We'll have achieved nuclear fission by next week." I choked on my nutrient slurry. "Nuclear? What now?" "Oh, don't worry, Professor." Glöpner babbled cheerfully. "It's just a little something for the energy crisis. Did you know humans used to power entire cities with it?" Alexandra says, "It's perfectly safe as long as you don't," and I quote, "royally screw the pooch." I'm not entirely sure what a pooch is, but I'm determined not to royally screw it. I ended the transmission, my mind reeling. This had gone beyond mere survival, beyond even the most generous definition of thriving. This was revolution, evolution, the birth of a new superpower. As the sun began to set on the third and final day, I steeled myself and opened a direct channel to Alexandra. It was time to regain some semblance of control over this situation. I began, trying to sound authoritative. "Miss Kumar, while your enthusiasm is commendable, I feel I must remind you that the purpose of this exercise was—" "Oh, hey, Prof." Alexandra's mud-streaked face filled the screen, her grin somehow even wider than before. Perfect timing. We were just about to send a delegation to parley with the sentient fungal network we discovered in the Northern Hemisphere. "Want to sit in? I have a feeling this could redefine our understanding of mycelial intelligence." I blinked, all 7 of my eyes. "The not at now, in the fungal network," she repeated, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Turns out the entire moon's ecosystem is linked by this vast underground network of—" "Oh, hold that thought." She turned away from the screen, shouting to someone off camera, "Zlorgax. The photovoltaic cells go on top of the huts, buddy. We're harnessing the sun, not the dirt." She turned back to me, still grinning. Anyway, as I was saying, I cut the feed. For a long moment, I sat in silence, staring at the blank screen. Then, with a resigned sigh, I reached for my emergency flask of Bridgelian hyper-whiskey. As I reached for that blessed flask of hyper-whiskey, I couldn't help but marvel at the absolute chaos unfolding before me. This was supposed to be a simple survival exercise, for Zorp's sake, not whatever this new civilization speedrun had become. I took a long pull from the flask, feeling the familiar burn of 6-dimensional alcohol searing its way through my digestive tracts. Right. Time to face the music. Flipping the comm channels back on, I was immediately assaulted by a cacophony of excited voices, clanging metal, and what sounded suspiciously like an impromptu alien drum circle, and that's how we'll achieve cold fusion by next Thursday. Alexandra's voice cut through the din, clear as a supernova. "Any questions?" A tentative appendage raised. It belonged to Xylop, a normally shy gastropodian who, I noted with growing alarm, was now sporting some kind of exoskeleton made of sharpened sticks and tree sap. "New? Alexandra?" Xylop's voice quavered. "What if the fungal network doesn't want to negotiate?" There was a beat of silence. Then Alexandra's laughter rang out, a sound that probably would have been infectious if it didn't make me want to hide under my console. "Oh, sweet summer child," she chuckled, patting Exolop's shell with what I could only describe as terrifying affection. "That's what the battle spores are for." "Battle spores?" I mouthed silently, my third liver preemptively starting to ache. When had they developed battle spores? Now, Alexandra continued, clapping her hands together. "Who wants to learn about representative democracy and the social contract?" The resulting cheer nearly blew out my speakers. I watched, slack-jawed, as the entire group began enthusiastically discussing the finer points of governance structures and civil rights. Leari, bless his gelatinous heart, was already drafting a constitution on a large piece of tree bark. It was at this point that I seriously considered faking my own death and retiring to a nice, quiet gas giant. But no, I had a duty, a sacred trust, a growing suspicion that if I didn't intervene soon, I'd be witnessing the birth of a new galactic superpower. Steeling myself, I opened a direct channel to Alexandra. Miss Kumar began, trying to inject some authority into my voice. "While your enthusiasm is certainly impressive. I feel compelled to remind you that the purpose of this exercise— Oh, hey, Prof. Alexandra's face filled the screen, smudged with what looked like equal parts dirt and scientific equations. Perfect timing. We were just about to hold our first democratic elections. Want to be an impartial observer? I hear it's all the rage in developing nations. I blinked. All 7 of my eyes. Democratic elections? Yep. She beamed, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. We've got a real diverse political landscape shaping up. The Agrarian Party is pushing for sustainable farming practices, while the technologists are all about rapid industrialization. And don't even get me started on the heated debates between the fungal rights activists and the mycelial separatists. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the sheer absurdity of the situation. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was evolution, revolution, the birth of an entirely new socio-political paradigm. Kumar, I managed to croak out. The extraction teams will be arriving in less than an hour. This exercise is meant to conclude extraction. Alexandra's eyes widened, a mischievous glint appearing that made all of my survival instincts scream in unison. No, Prof. I'm afraid we can't leave just yet. You see, we've made some new friends who are very interested in joining the Galactic Federation. The camera panned, revealing a group of what could only be described as sentient, ambulatory fungi. They waved cheerfully with appendages that looked suspiciously like they'd been engineered for tool use. Meet the representatives of the mycelial collective. Alexandra announced proudly, "We've been teaching them about interstellar diplomacy and the benefits of joining a larger galactic community. They're very eager to apply for Federation membership." I felt a headache brewing in all 3 of my brain lobes. This was so far beyond the scope of a simple survival exercise that it had looped around to absurd and was now approaching galaxy-altering. "Alexandra," I said, my voice carrying the weariness of a being who had seen one too many paradigm shifts in a single day. You can't create a new sentient species and apply for Federation membership. There are protocols, centuries of bureaucratic red tape, forms to fill out and triplicate. She had the audacity to wink at me. Already taken care of, Prof. Turns out, when you have a hyper-intelligent fungal network and a crash course in intergalactic law, paperwork becomes a breeze. We've already submitted the application. Should be hitting your inbox right about now. As if on cue, my datapad chimed. There, in my official Academy inbox, was a message titled Application for Galactic Federation Membership. The United Mycelial Republics of Epsilon X. I stared at the screen, then back at Alexandra's grinning face, then at the eager fungal representatives waving their newly evolved appendages. In that moment, I realized several things. This simple survival exercise had somehow resulted in the creation of a new sentient species, a thriving civilization, and potentially the youngest member world of the Galactic Federation. I was going to need a lot more Rigilian hyperwhiskey. The Academy curriculum was in desperate need of revision. Perhaps a new course, Ethical Considerations in Accidental Species, Uplift and Planetary Governance. Humans, and Alexandra Kumar in particular, should probably come with warning labels. As the extraction teams descended through Epsilon X's atmosphere, no doubt unprepared for the brave new world they were about to encounter, I couldn't help but chuckle. In 3 short days, one human had managed to turn a routine survival exercise into a revolution that would likely reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. "Well, Miss Kumar," I said, raising my flask in a weary salute, "I suppose congratulations are in order. You've certainly survived." Alexandra's grin, if possible, grew even wider. "Thanks, Prof. But this is just the beginning. Wait until you see what we have planned for next semester's econobiology field trip." As the transmission cut out, I drained the last of my hyper-whiskey and made a mental note to request a very, very long vacation. Something told me that the Galactic Federation and the Academy would never be quite the same again. And as for Alexandra Kumar, well, I had a feeling we'd all be hearing a lot more about her in the years to come. The galaxy, it seemed, wasn't quite ready for humans, but ready or not, here they came. May the cosmic forces have mercy on us all.